and excited to host Kristoffer today for this live masterclass. Kristoffer is going to be talking about product vision, strategy, and execution. And we will have a Q&A at the end. So feel free to pour in your questions on the chat as we go along. And let's get started. Kristoffer, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let me share my screen and then we can jump in. Everyone see everything okay? Looks like we're loading. We're live? Great. So my name is Kristoffer Nelson. I am a product manager at Facebook. The last decade plus, I've worked on ad tech, data tech product. That started in 2010. I was a co-founder of a company called Trax. We are an ad tech, data tech company building platforms to manage audience data and facilitate programmatic media. We listed to NASDAQ in 2016, and so that company had, it was a small cap public company, but a public company, and so we had good success and scale over the years. At that company, I was the COO, but also led many of our product initiatives and was the product owner across multiple ad tech, data tech products. From that, I created a company called BigToken. BigToken was a consumer-facing product, and my first consumer-facing product, that was a platform for people to own and earn money from their digital data and identity. And so I spent a lot of time on that product thinking about privacy, thinking about data, thinking about how the digital world may evolve from the structures that we created in Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, and what that might look like in a Web 3.0 world. Facebook thought some of my thinking and work was cool, and so I joined Facebook in 2020. I've been there for a little over 6 months now, and I'm working on projects across AI fairness and ads privacy. And so most of my product management background has been more of a product owner and executive. At Facebook, I am the traditional product manager. And so what I'm bringing to you today is perspective from both being a product manager in a large company and also perspective of being a founder and product owner in smaller organizations. So what we'll talk about is two things: right strategy and perfect execution. And it's this pairing, right strategy and perfect execution, that creates success. If you have the wrong strategy and you execute it well, you're not going to succeed. If you have the right strategy and execute it poorly, you're not going to succeed. Perfect execution creates great success. I would argue that if you have the right strategy and execute it with some mediocrity, you'll probably do pretty well there. But for extreme success, for great success, you need right strategy and perfect execution. Strategy starts with a new world. Its strategy starts with a vision. Often there's this quote that's used by founders and product people. It is from Henry Ford. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said they wanted faster horses. I don't know that Henry Ford actually said this, and so that's number one. But it's a quote that's out there a lot. This quote, I think, deeply misunderstood too. A lot of founders, a lot of product people use this to say, I know what people want better than people know what they want. And what I'm going to build is going to be something brilliant. And I'm going to ignore people feedback. I'm going to ignore lots of feedback. I'm going to ignore data because I believe this is what people want, just like Henry Ford, because, you know, if Henry Ford had asked people, they would have said they wanted faster horses, and Henry Ford built a car. What this misses and what is misunderstood here is embedded in this quote, embedded in this idea, is actually a very clear problem statement. A vision and new world starts with problems. It starts with a problem statement. And so here is Mr. Henry Ford, at the time, you had three main modes of transportation. You had steamboats for bodies of water. You had the railway systems in all over the world, and you had horses and buggies. And there are some pretty strict limitations to all three of these. Horses and buggies can't travel very fast and can't go very far. It's very, very slow to travel across land with horses and buggies. Um, Engines, steam trains, they could move a lot of people, they could move a lot of freight, but they were limited to the rails that existed. They had specific routes. Also, you couldn't do it on your own. You had to go with lots of people, and you were dependent on their schedule. You had no freedom. And so those, in certain ways, very efficient, it was also quite limited. And steamboats obviously required bodies of water. And so here is that initial insight, that initial problem statement. Like, I need to move faster, further, and with less restriction. And so Henry Ford, I believe, didn't start with an idea. He started with a problem. And what ultimately that created was, at first, not a car, but a combustible engine. And he created this combustible engine and then put it into, by and large, a wagon at the time. And that was our first automobile, but that allowed people to go further. Initially, I think horses and carriages were actually faster, but over time, the product improved. And now people could go faster, further, with less restriction. Now we have transportation that is optimized towards individuals. And a decade plus, we're now almost 100 years plus for mass automobile production. Henry Ford, with that insight, also built mass production systems and optimized mass production systems in the assembly line and things like that. And so not only did he create a way for people to go faster, he created faster ways for people to make product. Problems are rooted in friction. Cups exist to make drinking easier. Before cups, we drank with our hands or we drank with our mouths directly from a pool of water or stream. That is not very optimal. And so a cup was created to make drinking easier. Cups were then optimized. And so here we have a cup that's optimized to drinking cold liquid. We've invented cups that are optimized to drinking hot liquids. We have cups for wine, and we have cups for specific drinks. We have cups for outdoors. We have cups for indoors. We have cups to take away with you, cups for the go. Cups solve problems, and we've gotten better at making cups to solve specific problems. So problems are rooted in friction, and solutions reduce that friction. Obsess about problems. Strategy starts with problems. Great product starts with problems. And from problems, when you're clear about the problem, things start to become simple. Things become very, very clear. And so from problems flows vision. The world is a way right now that creates friction. The way the world is right now is a problem. I see a better way. I see a better world. I see a world where I'm not limited to trains, horse and buggies, and steamboats. I see a world where I have freedom to move faster, longer, and further on my own. And so from vision comes goals. We need to create something that helps us move faster, further, and more efficiently as an individual. From that comes a mission. Here's the way we're going to do that. Henry Ford didn't try and create an airplane. The Wright brothers did. The Wright brothers were like, we could fly. Flying is one way to move in a direction, right, that's not on land. And so there are lots and lots of ways to solve this problem of going faster and further with greater freedom. Henry Ford's was, I'm going to build a combustible engine, I'm going to build automobiles, and I'm going to find a way to make lots of them so that everyone can have this, right? That's your mission. And so from problems, you have vision. From problems, you have mission. From vision, you see goals. this is what we're going to do. Here are the milestones that we need to actually make this world happen. And then from goals, you get metrics. Well, this is how we're going to track if we're actually achieving that. Are we on our way to our goal? Are we on course? Are we on our way to bringing this vision into the world? And then from mission, this is how we're going to actually do it. This is what we're going to do to solve the problem. You get a strategy, you get a plan, right? You have, like, this is the way we're going to do it. Here are the specific steps that are going to get us there. And these are the things that we're going to do, the specific things, the tactics that help us achieve that mission, that help us drive towards that vision, that ultimately comes back to solving that problem. So here's some definitions. Problems: friction for people. Where do people experience friction? This is how you get from your 0 to 1. The world needs to be different, right? And this is how you continue to iterate on your product, because I guarantee you the first version of your product doesn't fully solve the problem. The first version of the automobile didn't fully solve the problem. Horses and buggies were faster than the first automobile, but the automobile could go further. You didn't have to feed the automobile. You didn't have to swap out your horses every 10 to 15 miles. Over time, the automobile did get faster. Over time, we built automobiles to haul things. We built automobiles to go very fast. We built automobiles for families. We built smaller automobiles and called them motorcycles. And so the first iteration is not going to necessarily be the solution, but is on the way to your solution. So problems is friction for people. Vision: what the world looks like when the problem is solved. Mission: what you do to solve the problem. Goal: how do you know you solved the problem? How do you know that you've actually achieved your vision? Metrics: what are the steps to solving your problem? Are you on track or are you off track? Strategy: your method and plan for solving the problem. Tactics: things you do to solve the problem, the specific things inside of that strategy. And then solutions: a hypothesis of what solves the problem. And this is important. The hypothesis part is important because oftentimes what happens is someone's like, oh, there's a problem. Oh, here's the solution, right? And then everyone gets excited about that first solution. But until you've actually put that solution into the world, you don't know if it'll work. You don't know that you've actually solved the problem. And so you could put that solution out there and it doesn't solve the problem. And if everyone got excited that was working on that problem, if everyone came together and said, here's a problem, and then they said, aha, we have an idea. And everyone was committed to that idea. If it doesn't solve the problem, now you have a problem. And that was, everyone was aligned on a solution. And so instead of getting excited about solutions for yourself and your team, make sure you're getting everyone excited about the problem, right? Work incredibly hard to get your engineers, your product designers, your content designers, your marketing team, whatever it might be, get them to obsess about the problem. And then once everyone is aligned on the problem, everyone's working to solve it. And if your first idea for solving the problem doesn't actually work, everyone is rooted back in the problem, right? You can try version 2, you can try version 3. I don't remember off the top of my head what the exact number of combustible engines were, but I think it was somewhere around at least 100. And so 100 solutions, right, to actually solve the problem. Similar to the light bulb, right? Hundreds of solutions until the problem was solved. If everyone got excited about the first combustible engine or the first light bulb, that would have been really challenging, right? When you get it wrong and you get it wrong and you get it wrong to stay motivated. But if everyone's oriented to the problem, then you have a committed team that will eventually find a solution. So everything's oriented to the problem. And this is how I view and structure a strategic process or a strategic document. It's super simple. I start with like, what is the problem? What is the friction? What is the problem space we are tackling, right? What does the world look like when we solve that problem? And then the mission, how are we going to solve that problem? What are we actually going to do? It's the mission is the container for the methodology and the way we will approach changing the world. And then from there, those are always my first three things. And then from there, it becomes really simple because with a problem space, you're going to have more granular problems, right? As we talked about earlier, people need to be able to move more efficiently, further, faster, with greater freedom, right? There are lots of ways to do that, and then there are lots of problems, right? You have an efficiency problem, you have a freedom problem, you have a distance problem, right? You have a speed problem. You have lots of granular problems. And so then from those granular problems, you create goals for each problem. And then from those goals, you have a solution that is a possible solution, a hypothesis on what actually might solve that problem. And then for each problem, you have a goal. And for each problem, you have a solution. In each problem, you have a way to track if you're actually achieving the goal. That helps you know if you're on track or off track. Oftentimes, product documents, strategy documents, it's filled with a ton of content, right? And most of that content is words on paper. Most of that content is fluff. Oftentimes when I review product documents or strategy documents from other teams, I will make my own document that looks very similar to what you're looking at here. I will start copying and pasting from the document that I'm reviewing. What's the problem space? What's the vision? Right? What's the mission? What are the granular problems? What are the goals around those problems? What solutions are being proposed here? How will we know if those are achieved? I will copy and paste all of those things into this document. Oftentimes, these documents are long. Product managers typically come from, either a consulting background or a high education background, right? Companies, especially large tech companies, value words on paper, and there are good things that can be discovered through that process. But what I like to do is simplify. I like to say, what are the problems? What's the vision? What's the mission? What are the granular problems? How do we know we're getting there? And oftentimes, you'll take a 20-page product strategy document and you can fit it into 5 pages. This is a great test. Once you've completed that initial strategy, can you come back and can you make it very, very simple and clear? So again, problems versus solutions. Here's a very real and practical example. 2 framings that are often used, jobs to be done or user stories. Should we wait for questions at the end? I think we'll take questions at the end. So if you want to just drop that in chat, we'll come back to it. Jobs to be done, user stories. Both different framings of the same thing. We need to build this thing. I love the jobs to be done framing because jobs to be done focuses on a problem. And so going back to our cup example, as a user, I need the most efficient way to drink, right? User stories are often solutions. As a user, I need a cup. And so one focuses on the problem, one focuses on the solution. There's appropriate times for both. But I definitely lean towards most often jobs to be done because then our XFN or cross-functional or then our engineers are focused on what is the solution or what's the problem and how might we best solve that instead of a specific cup or a specific solution. And so in 0 to 1 and often in iteration, launching a product is just a milestone on the way to solving a problem. And so if you're obsessed about the problem, right, launching the product is just one step in the process of solving the problem. If you're focused on the solution, oftentimes, right, the launch like becomes the goal, right? When you're focused on the solution, the launch becomes the goal. When you're focused on the problem, the launch is a milestone. And you launch it, and then you start tracking: are we solving that? Are we solving that problem? So there are the notes on right strategy, right? Focus on the problem. What does the world look like? How do you create something that creates that world? How do you get there? How do you know you're getting there? Perfect execution. So it's right strategy. That's number one. And right strategy starts with problems. Number two is perfect execution. And those two things, right? Great success. This is John Boyd. John Boyd was a fighter pilot in the Korean conflict between the U.S. and Korea. He was a fighter pilot and then an Air Force strategist and trainer for many years after that. He came up with something called the OODA Loop. When he was in combat in Korea, he noticed that there was a couple of things. The U.S. aircraft, they were heavier, they were faster, they could fly longer, and because they were bigger, they used hydraulic navigation systems or hydraulic steering systems. The enemy aircraft, the Russian MiGs, were smaller aircraft. They could accelerate quicker, but couldn't fly as fast ultimately as the U.S. aircraft. And they were more maneuverable, but because they were smaller aircraft, they had a manual steering system. And so, what John realized was, in a combat situation, the MiGs, if they could create quick victories, they would win in tight combat dogfighting, often because they were more maneuverable. And so he started to think about, well, what are the advantages of the U.S. aircraft? And one thing that he noticed was, okay, we can't maneuver as well, especially in tight situations, but we do have hydraulic steering systems. And so if combat progressed over longer periods of time, because the MiGs were manual, fighter pilots would start to wear out. Their arms would literally get tired, and their movements would be slower and slower over time. And so John Boyd came up with a system called the OODA Loop, and it's observe, orient, decide, act. And so the principles of OODA Loop in that aircraft combat situation was constantly move your plane around in large directions going quickly, stay away from close combat. And over time, the pilots flying the MiGs would wear out. They would slow down, and then they would eventually make a mistake. And so the OODA Loop is about quick iteration, and quick decision making, and constant pivoting. And so we'll jump into this because this is a great analogy for perfect execution. So observe, the first O in the OODA Loop. So observation is about data collection. In product development, right? How do you, especially going from 0 to 1, how do you collect that data? And so milestones, test cycles, right? Constant feedback from your team, right? Quick checkpoints on what is the information we're getting about this development cycle? Are we on track or are we off track? Product and production, right? That's your metrics. That's your user feedback. What is the data that you're collecting? You want to observe your situation. Right? Orient. So the second O, observe, orient. You start to synthesize that information. You start to have a sense of what's going on. Products in development, especially 0 to 1, lots of team syncs, lots of synthesizing of information. Where are we at? What's going on? Are we on track? Are we off track? What do we need to do next? Product and production, right? You're going to take those metrics, those insights, that logging data. You're going to take the user feedback, and you'll analyze it. From there, you'll start to see patterns. You'll understand the product or the outcomes of your work, and then you can decide. And so you can, from observation to orientation, you can now make a decision on what's the next best step. And so product and development, you're getting the team aligned, right? You're getting the team aligned on, this is what's happening. Here's all the things that are happening. Here's the direction things are going. Are we all aligned on that? Right. Now we can make a decision. Now we can move things forward. Product and production, right? The decision is often around goals. And so are we on track? Are we off track? Are we hitting these goals? And then lastly, you then act, you commit. I like to think about in product and development, in the OODA Loop, it's liberated to work. And what liberated to work means is that everyone is aligned around the problem, right? Everyone is sharing the same strategy. Everyone is observing, right? The first O, observing the same data. And so everyone has access to the same information. Everyone has access to the plans, right? There is source of truth documents. There are shared milestone documents. There are shared metric dashboards. Everyone has access to the information. Everyone knows what the problem is, and then everyone's liberated to do their work. Your engineers are liberated to code. Your designers are liberated to draw. Your content designers or copywriters are liberated to write. Your marketers are liberated to work on those marketing plans. Product and production, people are liberated to work. Teams are empowered to look for the problems, find where those metrics are missing the mark for the goals, and they're empowered to make the changes needed to reach those goals. And so the OODA Loop: observe, orient, decide, act. This happens in iteration. The insight of John Boyd was, it's not just the loop, it is the constant iterative process of this loop. And so you observe, you orient it, this is where I'm going to go next. You make this decision, and then you commit, and then you arrive at that point, you observe, and you do this over and over and over again, and eventually you gain the advantage. And so what all of this comes down to for me ultimately, and what product management, the opportunity in product management is, as product leaders, is you build impactful products with happy teams, right? If you start with the problem, if you end with the problem, your product will be impactful. If the team is aligned on that problem, right? If the team is mission driven, the team has access to the same information, if the team has the ability to orient and decide and act, right? You have a happy team. And so product management, I think, in a nutshell, build impactful products with happy teams. And so obsess about problems. Strategy is about solving a problem, not achieving a solution. Launching product is a milestone, right? You haven't solved the problem. Putting product out there is one step on the way to solving the problem. Get everyone on the same page. Keep everyone on the same page. When the page turns, make sure your team is turning that page together, right? Everyone's observing the same information. Everyone's orienting around what that information means. Everyone's deciding and then acting together. Iterate quickly. Create impactful products. Make sure you have happy teams. And so with that, I will stop sharing, and we can jump into questions. Shambhavi, how do we want to do this?
Yeah, so I see there are a couple of questions on the chat. So let's start with that. So the first one here is from Moinek. So he's saying, when it comes to problems versus solutions, where do you involve the users?
Where do you involve the users?
Right.
So I think in lots of ways. Oftentimes when you're going from 0 to 1, you might observe that problem, and it might start with you. And then you go through a process of like, is this actually a problem for other people? And there's lots of different ways to do that. Like one classic sort of product way is look at Google searches around specific problems that you're thinking about and see what the search volume is for that. When you start to develop, you then have if you have the opportunity to do research, right, get direct user research back from that, and you can do that formally. If you're not at a company that has a budget to do that, it's a lot of family and friends, crowdsourcing on social media. One great thing about crowd fundraising is that you can get a lot of people involved. And so that becomes another method for getting people feedback. And then product and production, you're going to have a couple different things. You're going to have the logging metrics that you're looking at, and those could be specifically like how people use the product, how people are moving through a specific conversion funnel, and then how people ultimately what features are they using, and how are they utilizing the product. And then there's going to be the user feedback side. And that's going to be direct feedback, and then you can do various sentiment analysis. I like to really couple both. You can learn certain things by observing how people use the product and what they're using and how often they're using it, and you can learn other things through the sentiment analysis. Why they're doing what they're. If you don't have both, then you're going to make assumptions about why they're doing what they're doing, and your assumptions may be wrong.
So let's move on to the next one. It's from Rajat. So I think he also has a very similar question. How do you select a solution from multiple ones? Okay, it's different, without involving users and without time or appetite for experimentation. Which is partly covered.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so one thing that's going to happen when you start to imagine, when you look at problems and you break down the granular problems, there's going to be lots of options, right? Like Henry Ford didn't build an airplane, he built a car. Oftentimes there's going to be in your process constraints. And so you're going to have resource constraints, you're going to have team constraints, you're going to have expertise constraints. Those constraints also are an important part to your product development process, because they're going to, in certain terms, give you a direction. There's going to be certain solutions that are off limits to you for a variety of reasons. It may be market factors. You may decide that like this is our best opportunity. It may be expertise factors, like Henry Ford's like, I don't know how to build airplanes, but I can figure out how to build a car. The Wright brothers obsessed about flight for their entire lives. They spent their childhood observing birds and building kites, right? And so they're in their nature to solve the solution of travel through air travel. And so your constraints, both in the market and in your organization, are going to be the things that help you prioritize the solutions.
I hope, Rajat, that answered your question. Let's move to the next one. So are there any other frameworks like OODA Loop, or OODA Loop works for all types of industries, products, and projects?
I think there's lots of there's lots of iterative frameworks. And so like, yes, like, are there more? Certainly. This is one of my favorite. I think it applies to everything that is iterative in both product and organization. And so it's something that I go back to because of its universal nature and its simplicity. And in when I utilize frameworks, I look for those two things. Like, does this apply to almost everything that I've done and can think of? And is it simple? And those are my two principles in framework selection. There's a lot of ways to build products. There are a lot of things that you can layer into this. You might use different frameworks for different parts of the product development process. You might add nuance for for going from 0 to 1 in a startup. You might add nuance for going from 0 to 1 in a large company. You might add nuance for iterative product management for existing product. And so there's lots of things I might add into this depending on the situation. But as far as a master framework, this is something that I go back to a lot.
All right. How does OODA framework fit in Agile, or OODA Loop fit in Agile framework?
Yeah, and so that's a very, very good question, and a good observation too. In many ways, OODA is agile, and it works very, very well. There's like from all intents and purposes, there's not difference. OODA can be used I'd say the one thing to think about is agile, right? Most teams are 2 weeks, some are one, some are month long. But it's very rare that you're in an agile process that's longer than a month cycle, in my experience. And so OODA is both long-term and short-term. And so there are periods when you may spend a quarter or 6 months or even a year in the observation, especially like oftentimes founders will think about their problem space and solution for a very long time before they begin to understand, right? BigToken, the second company that I founded, I thought about that for probably 3 years. At Trax, I was working on data audience systems and ad tech for like Walmart and P&G. And one thing that I was doing with Walmart and P&G was using their CRM data to test third-party audience targeting segments and different media companies, and the efficacy of and quality of audience, and the efficacy and quality of their media. And what I did was with them, I built a system that could match and then track each ad impression to eventually a Walmart purchase. And the first version of that product I built in 2014, and it took us 6 weeks to get information back. And over the course of a couple of years, I was getting information back in real time on audience data and media quality. And so what I observed in that was a lot of third-party audience data is bad, and a lot of media is bad, and a lot of advertisers waste money. But I also observed that data coming from closed ecosystems like Amazon and Facebook and parts of Google was incredibly high quality. The audiences were incredibly high quality. The targeting was incredibly precise. But the problem with that was it's not interoperable. Those audiences aren't interoperable across all systems. And so when I created BigToken, I started with a problem for advertisers. And my insight was I can create an open audience system with high quality data by focusing on people. And so I built a consumer product to solve an advertiser problem. I had thought about that for 3 years before I even started. And I thought about it like obsessively. And so you can spend a very long time in Observe, right? You can spend a long time in Orient. That first OODA loop on a 0 to 1 startup could be years. And so it applies to long-term strategic work, and it also applies to short-term quick iteration.
If I want to release a V0 for a selected group of users, what do you think would be good enough metrics to start on V1?
It super depends on what you're doing. Like what problem are you solving, and what's your hypothesis for the solution? Like, is it a physical product? Is it a digital product? Does it require payment, right? Are you onboarding people? Are you building a 0 to 1 on an existing audience base? And so it's like impossible for me to answer that question specifically. But what I would say broadly is, um, what's your hypothesis for the solution, right? And then what do you need to do to allow that hypothesis to function? And so you might have a product that requires onboarding. And so to even test whether your solution is viable for the problem, you need to get people into the product. And so you might have a conversion funnel set of metrics. And then once they're in the product, what are they supposed to do with it? Like, what's the solution supposed to solve? And so how are people using it, right? And is it solving the problem for them? Right. That's your North Star metric. Like, did your solution actually solve the problem? And are people using it in the cycle that you imagined? Right. Is it a one-time solution, or is it something that needs solving all the time? Like, I'm bored. I have lots of apps on my phone that allow me to solve boredom in various increments of time. Right. And so some of those apps, the creators of them wanted me to use them every day, and some of them are for specific tasks. Like, I need to ride in a car, and I don't want to drive. And so, like, it's going to be broad, but I would say, like, are you getting people into your solution, and how are you doing that? Like, are they using it to solve the problem in the way that you imagine?
Moinak has a follow up here. So he says, let's say I'm building an analytics dashboard for day to day operations. So then how should we think about the metric?
Yeah, I mean, I think same thing. You're going to have like you're going to have a couple different like sections. Like, it depends on the complexity of your product, but like, you're going to have just general function, uptime, efficiency metrics. Like, is your product generally working? You're going to have the conversion funnel type metrics. Are people coming into the product? You're going to have the usage metrics within the product. What are people doing? What are people not doing? That will help you refine the product. And then you're going to have your solution metrics. Is it solving the problem? And like Shambhavi says, how well is it solving the problem? And so, depending on your function, like I work at a big company. We're not looking at like global app uptime and efficiency metrics and things like that. Like, there's other teams that do that. We're looking at the metrics that are very specific to our product and the goals that we have. And so it also depends on the context of your product and the context of your company.
I want to add something here. We do have a concept of like input and output metrics, where something that you can control are your input metrics, right? Like things like revenue is not something that you can control. That's the output metric. So it's good to have combination of input and output metrics for your product and feature. And there is also a interesting concept of downstream impact. Now, it again depends on your use case, but if you are doing something that is indirectly contributing to the company in a long run, that's also something to measure and measure and track so that you know what is the impact over a long run from your product.
Yeah, I would also, and to that point, and those are great add-ons and good context and nuance. I would also add counter metrics. And so there's going to be second order effects of your product. So you might launch a section in an app, and you're responsible for that. But in doing that, you cannibalize all traffic from the parts of the app that generate the most revenue. And so you'll also want to with those inputs and output metrics, and then maybe even higher order second order effect metrics, you want to have those counter metrics and like what are the guardrails. And so if you're taking too much traffic away, or you're taking too much, maybe you launch a product and it slows down the load time of your app, by a considerable amount. And so the product itself is achieving the goal, but it's challenging other goals within the organization. So you want to know what those counter metrics are.
Okay, so moving to the next one. So Nagappan is asking, how do you decide the strategy for the product? There might be multiple problems to solve, but you need to come up with the levers to strategize the problems to solve right. So how do you decide which problem to solve? I think that's the question.
Yeah, it's so prioritization framework, and within a large problem space, there's always going to be lots and lots of problems. I talked earlier about constraints. You're going to have various constraints and expertise and resources. That's typically going to be some variables in your prioritization framework, and then you're going to have others. And so one thing, a very common prioritization framework for me is, what are my constraints? What are my resources? What's going to create the most impact in the things that I have the resources to achieve? And often also, what can I do most quickly? And so when you're, and especially, and so 0 to 1's a little bit different because you have to put something out into the world, and you're not sure how people are going to respond to all of those things. And so in that first 0 to 1, you're going to find a problem. You're going to find a way that you think solves it, and you're going to put it out into the world. Some parts of that will work. Generally speaking, some parts, if you've done good work, some parts of that will work, some parts of that won't work. Now you're iterating, right? And so as you're iterating, what's going to create the most impact? And so that's one component. Like what can create the most impact? What resources and expertise do I actually have the ability to do? And then 3, how quickly can I do that? When you're hypothesis testing, a part of hypothesis testing is moving hypotheses down the pipeline and exiting them. Most of the things you try won't work, but you have to iterate quickly and hypothesis test quickly in order to find the things that do. And so typically speed to execution is the 3rd for me. Every product, every circumstance, and different stages in the product development cycle will have different variables. And so one thing that I do on strategy, whether it's 0 to 1 or it's iteration, is I always set that that prioritization framework initially, and we use the same one. And that prioritization framework is communicated to everybody.
Sorry to interrupt. Thanks for the session. It was very good. So the question, to clarify the question, I'm Nagappan here. Clarify the question. The question was more on, there are multiple problems. So initially, you would have to come up with a strategy on what is the strategy for this product. And then prioritization comes after the strategy, right? Like first you have to come up with themes or the levers you're going to solve for the quarter or for the year. So that may be like 10 problems to solve, but what is the theme? How do you identify this is the theme? Or identify these are the levers which will help you to solve the user problems? Like for example, for a 1
to can you clarify?
1 to 10 product, 1 to 100 product, engagement may be a problem, or your onboarding may be a problem. So like education may be a problem. But initially to come up with, okay, these 3 things can be themes. Like how do you identify the themes?
Oh, okay, got it. Great. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. It's you go back to the observe and orient, right? And so observe, you're gathering all the data that you have. You're gathering the usage data, the metrics data. You're gathering user feedback. You're looking at where people are getting stuck in funnel and product flow. And that's the observe stage. And then the orient stage is that literal thing of like, we have a conversion funnel problem. We have an education problem. We have a speed problem. We have an efficiency problem, right? and then so you will be able to identify those themes and those buckets through the observation cycle. The orientation cycle is about defining those themes, right? And bucketing that information and say like, well, all of these data points we think means this one thing, right? We think we have a user education problem, but we also have a conversion funnel problem. And then the decide step is, okay, if we solve education, we think this is going to be the outcome, right? We think people will convert 2% more or whatever, right? And if we solve this conversion funnel friction, right, we think people will convert like this, or this will be the outcome, right? And so from there, like then you make the decision. Like we have the information, we understand how these things work together. If we solve one of these problems, we understand this is what the outcome is going to be. So then you decide and then you act. Does that make sense? Does it answer it for you?
Yeah, I was muted. Yeah, it was. Yeah, this is what
okay, great.
Yeah.
Good. Like it's like frameworks are meant to be broad, right? And every circumstance is going. What I love about OODA is that every circumstance is going to be different, and every circumstance is going to need different approaches. I'm working on multiple products right now and problems. All of them, I'm using different prioritization. I'm using different frameworks. There is each one is uniquely different because I went in and looked at it and said, what do we need to do to solve this problem? And across multiple things that I'm working on, this comes up in different ways. And so OODA allows you to be flexible, and oftentimes product management requires that flexibility.
Okay, so I have one more question. I think this is the last one. Maybe we can take one more. So this is from Viraj. How do you define ramp up for a specific metric when you take a product from 0 to 1? For example, you plan to launch a fitness app. How do you define how many users you have to acquire each month or week? How will your ramp look like?
Yeah. And so you're going to, like this conversation was very focused on product development strategy. And so we didn't touch a lot on business strategy, right? And so along with so you're going to see a problem, you're going to go through a process and understand what solutions might look like. That is going to be coupled with a business plan. If I, and that business plan says like, I have this much money, right? It costs this much for me to solve this problem. I need to make money. And that can be done through, if you're in a 0 to 1 and it's a startup, that needs to be done through either fundraising or you're producing revenues. And a lot of 0 to 1, you're probably in a fundraising cycle. A part of your solution space is going to be, what do I need to do to get to the next round of funding? And so when I talk about constraints, I talked about constraints earlier and how you, as a part of the prioritization framework for how you choose solutions, a part of those constraints are, we need money. And so we either need to make revenue or raise money. And in order to raise money, you're often going to have to show progress to investors to go from your seed angel to your Series A, your Series B, or Series C. And so that's going to be a part of it. And so with your product plan and strategy, you're going to have a business plan, and that's going to help guide you on, I need to acquire this many users to generate revenue, or I need to acquire this many users, like customers, paying customers to generate revenue, or I need to acquire this many users so that I can upsell them on game items, or I can make money from advertising, or whatever that might be. And that business plan is going to be what helps guide you in establishing those metrics. You're welcome. There's a lot of things in chat here. I haven't been reading the chat at all. And so if I've missed anything, I'm sorry.
Yeah, if we missed anything, please ping on the chat. Viraj says, okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you all very much for spending whatever part of your Saturday this is. In India it's late, and so if you're in India, thank you for being with us so late. If you're on the West Coast and in the United States, it's early, so thanks for spending your Saturday morning with me. I love building product. I love talking about product. I love solving problems. And so, last words, orient to the problem. Right strategy, perfect execution, great success. And so thank you, Shambhavi. It's been really fun working and coaching and helping product managers grow in their career. A quick note on just interviewing is a specific skill. One thing that I love about Facebook is in our interview process, we're really looking for how do you approach problems and what is your authentic point of view on approaching problems. That takes a lot of work. In my Facebook interview process, I spent a ton of time in preparation. I know how to build products. It's hard to express that in 45 minutes in a high pressure situation. And so these interviews, especially at large companies, are challenging things. Spend the time to build up that skill, and whether you do it on your own or you do it with support, because that is a specific skill, and you want to make sure you're presenting your best self in those circumstances. And so I think Mentor Me Good is a great platform and a great idea. And so happy to support, and thank you, Shambhavi, for this opportunity. I love talking about products, so this has been really fun.